6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Map Round Show. This is the Built in New York series, where I'm chatting to some amazing founders changing the shape and future of business as we know it. With me on the line is the co-founder and CEO of Imperium 3. His name is Shailesh Upreti. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. Hey, Matt. Thank you. And just a correction, I'm CEO of C4V and the co-founder of IM3NY.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. It's easily confusing, but yes.
Yeah, no, that's cool. You're a big deal. And what I'm really loving about what you guys are doing, I've had the privilege of getting to know exactly what you're doing, is what you're doing in the renewable energy space, and specifically in the context of batteries. I think it's really remarkable. So guys, stick around. This is going to be a great show. So Shailesh, for our viewers and audience around the world who haven't heard about what you guys are doing, give us the backstory. Kick us off.
Yeah, so Matt, first of all, thanks for having me in the show. It's a wonderful show that you have been organizing. I've been watching some of them, so thanks for hosting us today. C4V, which is the parent company, have been working in designing new molecules. We call it to store energy. And last 10 years, we have worked on a cobalt and nickel-free technology to advance the domestic manufacturing and also build a very comprehensive supply chain to scale it up. So primarily to store renewable energy, but also support the electric transport market.
So Shailesh, I've got your C4V website up for everyone. So what exactly is the problem that you're solving here? Is this a battery problem? Is it a sustainability problem? Walk us through exactly what the problem is from your perspective.
Yeah, in long term, I would say sustainability problem, because end of the day, we do not want to design something that we cannot take to market and sustain long-term businesses. So in a bigger picture, definitely we are solving the sustainability challenge, both in terms of the environmental sustainability, but also the business sustainability. And what we have done till date is primarily focused on a very selective components that go inside the battery. And these components are primarily the driver for the performance and the cost. So by handling these key components, we are definitely targeting markets where performance and cost are the key metrics. And that pretty much include majority of the markets in electric mobility, but also in renewable energy like solar and wind energy storage.
So let's talk about sustainability first, and then we can get into like what you guys are doing, because you've built, I think, the world's third largest giga factory or battery factory.
I would say North America's third largest, not the world's third largest, but it will be the first globally with ex-Asia supply chain.
Right, got it. So when it comes to sustainability, there's a lot of greenwashing that's happening within the sustainability space. To what extent, being in the sustainability category, is there greenwashing happening? So greenwashing, for everyone, is basically the process of like lip service to being sustainable. It's not actually in like carbon credits. It's like, well, are you being carbon neutral, or are you actually being sustainable? And I think those are two very different things or ideas. So I'd love to get your view, Shailesh, on this idea of greenwashing. How much greenwashing is happening in the private sector?
Yeah, so I think in long term, definitely the challenge here is two industries are transitioning, right? The solar and wind, which is replacing the coal-fired power plant, right? So that's the direct impact on the generation side. And same is on the electric transport. The batteries or electric cars are replacing the internal combustion engine. So one is the replacement on the end user side, where energy is directly consumed by devices. And the other is how the supporting or ancillary and these components that go into solar, wind, or electric cars, for example, battery, is produced, right? Because in the production process, all the way to mining, various different value chain partners involved, right? Whether it's mining of lithium or nickel or cobalt or iron, manganese, all that require its own energy footprint, right? So I think there are two ways to look at it. One at the machine level, we call it, where you are dealing with the end uses directly by consumer, like car, as I said, and home storage, and using the solar and wind in your homes and offices. And the other is how the key components like battery is being produced and integrated with it. So we are looking into both, one by addressing the market need and going into markets where we can bring big impact by having a product that will replace such old or traditional or dirty carbon intense products. And second is really making these batteries long term sustainable, where how and what goes into the battery is evaluated for end to end carbon footprint, more like your total toxic as well as carbon footprint or life cycle assessment of a product. And in both the areas, I would say we are definitely leading in the US, not only making the product greener but also making it available. Because one of the biggest challenges, how to address both. You in the race of scaling technologies, you typically end up using a proven product which has its own downside of carrying the larger toxic and carbon footprint. So balancing that, I would say, is what we have figured out. And right now, it's been a perfect timing for us to cohesively look into that and bring a new product that you can call next generation or new age green technology.
Mm-hmm. So sticking with the battery story for now, isn't I heard rumblings of like, I think it's nickel. That's one of the key ingredients in traditional batteries. Is that correct?
Yeah, cobalt and nickel, I would say both. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was a story around like, well, I think there's one country in Africa, I believe, where the majority of the nickel comes from. Which is that country?
Yeah, cobalt comes around 60% cobalt comes from DRC, Congo.
Okay, yeah. And then there was the whole stink around, well, if that's the case, like, it's like how sustainable are batteries, right? And I think what's interesting, to your point of front around like you guys are not only reimagining the future or creating a more sustainable future, but you're actually working with materials and to develop technology, battery technology specifically, that actually not reduces its reliance on like traditional sources of battery materials, let's just say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what have you guys actually done? And feel free to share as much as you can. I know you guys are. There's only so much you can share in the public forum, but like, like what have you guys done from a technology or edge technology perspective around battery power design and materials? Like what's actually happened there?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you kind of hit the main pain point of the industry, because a majority of the gigafactories that are being built globally to meet the need of electric transport and the renewable energy are primarily driven by the traditional technologies. All the critical components that go into batteries are primarily having those, very intense metals like cobalt, which is concentrated in one particular country, and it's a big risk. It's not only the supply risk, but it's also the natural reserve that we have. So you can't really scale it beyond certain limits. So you reach a theoretical limit. So then you can't really call it sustainable because it's not reaching the mass, right? So from that perspective, but also the toxic and carbon footprint, as I mentioned earlier, it becomes part of it. And you may have read news around how in certain countries even child labor and very toxic chemicals are involved in these mining operations. That's probably people least bothered about or hear about. But there are certain processes and unethical mining practices used in some of these very heavy high price components. So we tried to replace that with more benign metals that have been mined in other industries but in a more ethical way, and also are one of the top abundant metals, so you're not really dependent on very specific countries and globally available metals. So without disclosing the key metals that we are using, because we still I think in very early phase of commercialization, but I can definitely disclose that our key metals are used in one of the most popular industry like steel industry. So they are not like exotic elements that we cannot use. So that definitely has given us a little bit of edge. In the US primarily, we are leading this giga scale manufacturing without using cobalt and nickel, and that definitely gives us some market benefits by having early entrant.
Hmm. There's an article while you were talking, Shailesh, that I brought up. It's basically the headline is it's on NS Energy. So China, cobalt in the Congo. Why Xi Jinping is winning the batteries arms race. If you think about this, like movement to sustainability, electric vehicles, there's a whole bunch of Teslas on the road. There's Rivians. It seems to be like everyone's moving towards this, sustainable, quote unquote, EV market. And to your point, if like 60% of the world's cobalt comes from the DRC, seems to me like that begs the question about is there an actual battery arms race, if you know what I'm trying to say. There's like there's a movement, it's like how fast can we source the materials that are going to or power, quote unquote, forgive the pun, but power the future of like sustainable energy, right? So that's really interesting. I think that's the traditional way. What I'm hearing from you is that you guys have developed technology that uses other materials, so that arms race, that battery race, essentially, it's no longer the only option. There is in fact a plan B.
Absolutely. And there are two ways we are solving that issue. One is the material issue, right? Which is where, what kind of metals that go inside the battery and how they are produced, whether they're green processes and, cost and environmental footprint. The other is the design, because this is a new technology, there are still many unknown how a basic building block, we call it cell, that you put together, like in Tesla car, there are about 5,000 of those capsules. The single capsule is called cell. They are put together, right? So we have been, we recently, last year, we launched a product that can also eliminate a lot of design challenges or design inefficiencies that go into a product like car building, right? And those inefficiencies are huge. Like, it may sound minimal when you compare it at one car level, but when you're producing millions of cars, just 5% or 10% improvement is massive, right? So having a design and then the material issue solved simultaneously actually gives us a huge benefit that will make a battery not only economically viable or sustainable, but also environmentally, because it goes all the way to the system level, how much energy used per kilometer or per mile. And that goes back to, the carbon footprint and the toxic footprint of the product overall. So any energy improvement or efficiency improvement going to give a long-term benefit, because car life could be 10 to 15 years on average, and electric could be even more. So that's kind of how we are looking at it, bringing two technologies together to bring overall consumer benefit.
Mm-hmm. So I want to maybe paint a picture of like how much of a energy gap there is. And I found this story on your website here. So you guys are obviously building the third largest gigafactory in the US or in North America. And what you guys are saying here is that there's a gap by 2030. There's a 13,000 gigawatt hours of expected annual demand by 2030 and a 5,000 gigawatt hour gap. So like it's hard for the average person to understand, like, what is a gigawatt hour? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we're not all Elon Musk and engineers who like build gigafactories and work at Tesla. So like put it into perspective for people. Like, what is 1 gigawatt hour in terms of its ability to power a unit of production? Like, give us a real world example. Like when you talk about a 5,000 gigawatt hour gap, how much energy is that?
Yeah, so 1 gigawatt hour is typically around 15,000 cars, or you can say a million houses, right? Depending upon obviously the 150,000 to a million, depending upon the battery storage. But 15,000 car will be a good example, right, for each gigawatt hour. So that's multiplied by 5,000. It's a big number, basically. And that's the gap that exists today. Other than Tesla and LG Chem, there are new announcements. There are many gigafactories being announced, but it takes a long time to build. It has taken us like 4 to 5 years just to build the infrastructure, and almost 10 years to come up with this innovation that is ready to be scaled.
Mm-hmm. So you guys have also raised north of $200 million so far for this thing. So what you're doing is like it's very acute, it's very needed, it's a problem that the world really cares about. There's a lot of investment going into sustainable energy. There's a lot of startups working in developing technology to bridge certain sustainability gaps, meet certain sustainability goals, 2030, 2050, whatever the case might be. And you guys are sitting in a very interesting position it's really like an infrastructure play that you guys are solving here. So what would you say is like the hardest thing about what you do? Of all the things that are hard, because it's all hard, is there something that stands out for you, Shailesh, as being like, you know what, like of the 100 problems I solve every day as CEO, this is the one that comes up the most? What is that?
I think the domestic supply chain, because that is one of the hardest thing, not because it's a bit difficult. It's just there are more than 30 components involved, and then if you go into subcomponent, it adds up to 100 different things that you need. And having those components available at scale at the same time as you are scaling is one of the biggest challenge. Otherwise, your dependency on foreign supplies is very high. So the way we are looking at is really solving, by having as much as localized supply for each of these components, and then their subcomponent, because it takes a lot of different chemicals and different metals to come together by the time they put in a battery. So going back all the way to mining, and mining takes 3 to 5 years to open up and complete the full feasibility, and then all the funding in place by the time it's operating. So I think having those 20 plus components, which adds up to again 100 components at the mining level maybe, and then operating those through different channels and partnerships, and making those components available in time so we can plan our scale up is one of the big challenge. And doing all that with US sourced or North America sourced material is one of the biggest challenges the industry is facing, and I think so do us.
So sticking with supply chain, it seems to me like with something like this, I mean, even if you think about what Tesla's done, they're very much open. If you think about iTunes and Apple, it's closed, right? Like you must be an Apple, you must own an iPhone to enjoy the whole ecosystem that Apple offers. And what I found really interesting about Tesla and Elon Musk and so forth is that they made all their thinking, their technology, all their patents available for anyone else to use, to then work, collaboratively with them and in a partnership-led model to really help solve this challenge, which matters to all of us. There's no point just one person winning. You know what I mean? Like that's a bit silly in this context. So on the context of partnerships, how important is it? Because if you think about the supply chain problem you've just shared with everyone, seems to me like partnerships are essential in solving, not only the supply chain problem, but the problem of innovation, the problem of distribution, the problem of continual improvement, and competition also. So what have you, as CEO of C4V, like what is your point of view around partnerships that other startups and scale-ups should be considering when it comes to obviously taking and solving problems that they care about?
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the most critical thing that in our model, like as we being startup trying to take this massive undertaking, right, to build one of the top three, or one of the top among the top gigafactory player here in the US. What we feel such partnership going to play a long-term role. Each of these components are either specialty chemical or very highly refined metals used, so purities are very high, and having those level of purity and scale is big challenge. And if you try to solve 100 challenges simultaneously, most likely you will fail, right? Because you can't do 100 things simultaneously. And that's where I think these partnerships, supply chain partnerships, play a very, very important role. And we have done and spent massive time and investment in that part of our, scale of effort. So we have today more than 240 companies part of our qualified supply chain that we call it for the cell manufacturing, that include the raw material supplies, also equipment and machinery, because there are a handful of companies who supply big machines today to build and operate at giga scale. So having those partnership definitely is the most crucial thing, as you rightly mentioned, not only to make the product cheaper and available, but downstream, the competition side, the overall, how to then eventually support multiple OEMs, and also investment. Because if we ourselves look into this entire end-to-end value chain spectrum, it could be $1 trillion investment. It's impossible for a tech company to come up with such massive investment. So I think that's where these partnerships play a very important role, and we have been fortunate to have found very strong partners. And this has been, I would say, effort of many companies that we come together, and IM3NY is one of the example where all the right type of partners that came together and formed a consortium, which eventually helping do that heavy lifting that a manufacturing entity has to do initially, because it's a heavy capex business.
So just sticking with this investment conversation or topic for a moment. So I keep seeing things on LinkedIn, like social media, talk to founders, talk to VCs, investors, and there's definitely a sense that given where the market is at, where the economy is, the macroeconomics are at, that it's becoming harder and harder to raise capital. In fact, a number I can share with everyone is like the total amount of venture capital invested in startups globally has dropped by 34% just in the last 12 months. So if you're in the infrastructure business, right, it requires a lot of capital. I mean, like I was like, what? You've raised 230 odd million? Like that's crazy. But it's because of like the need for that scale of investment, because you're doing things at scale. I'm curious to get your view, Shailesh, on raising money in the current climate when you're dealing with the kind of numbers that you're at. Like there's a lot of like startups for me, like they're just constantly raising money, like at some point, so either pre-seed, growth, expansion, whatever the case is. And you guys seem to be doing a great job at that. So with the market being where it's at, and the cost of capital being where it's at, venture capital being more selective, what is your advice to a founder around raising money in the current climate?
Yeah, I think we always say that money is very, very important to build a business. But in our word, we say is the last thing you need to be a successful business, because there are many other pieces and elements that play a very important role before money kicks in, right? Now, that includes obviously a product, and they are connected to investment, but you have to be smart at what point, how much to raise, rather than raising continuously every 6 months. So, but your network, the supply chain part of it, also if there are ways to save money. In our case, we were able to acquire some very high capex infrastructure at low cost. So those are the things creatively we have to come up with. But that said, it definitely, the business manufacturing and cell manufacturing particularly is very, very capital intense. But at the same time, when a heavy capex has to be put into infrastructure, there are various different mode of ways to raise it, and there are various different instruments that you can go after, including debt and including federal funding that is available. If you look at DOE from the federal government, there are more than $20 billion capital available for the right projects. GM got almost $2.5 billion a few weeks back to build a similar business like ours in cell manufacturing, and they are scaling these components. So definitely there is capital available, and there is a way to get to it. But in our case, I think what we try to do is get enough to get to the next stage, and not try to raise too much too fast. Now, 200 million may sound big number, but in our like gigafactory scale, 2 billion is kind of the minimum bar to succeed and compete. So we are still like in our early stage journey to that, before we go highway speed. I think we are right now like 10 to 20 miles an hour, and try to get and reduce the risk as much as possible, and keep upgrading that your phases where you have access to much cheaper and massive money that you need. But you're right, this is infrastructure. There are different type of capital you need. I don't think any VC will be interested in investing in this kind of business. So you have to find the investor who really believe in infrastructure and clean energy, and this whole ESG investment bucket that every bank and every investor right now looking into. And I think there's huge capital in EV itself. Like I would say within last 2 years, there have been more than 300 to $400 billion invested. That goes all the way from mining to some of these operational plants where EVs are manufactured. But that's just like an example how much money has gone into it, and it's available.
Okay, so I've got an interesting question for you. So this one's from Steve Delson. So Steve Delson's also in the infrastructure play in energy, based out in California. I should actually connect you guys just to have a conversation, because just to echo what you said, he's got the same problem around raising money, and he asked me to ask this question to Steve Blank and Davish Gonthal, but I didn't get to it. So I'm going to ask you, because you're actually in this infrastructure business and you're successfully raising money. So the issue is this: he's saying that it's the mindset of an investor. So if you're doing like a SaaS investment, it's cool, man. Like, well, you're doing $1 million ARR or $1 million MRR, whatever it is, and they're looking to invest in companies where they can get a relatively short return on their capital. So let's just say 3 to 5 years max. If you're in the infrastructure business, you're talking like 10 years. You're talking like time to value or time to exit of like 10, 15, 20 years even. So a venture capitalist is just going to go, no, man, I'm passing because I'm not going to get that return, right? I want that return because maybe it's even like a fund. I've got these, investors who I'm managing money for. So I need to make sure I get a return on their investment. So there's PE, which seems to me like a private equity, seems to me like a longer form, because they raise their fund and then there's like a 10-year window that they're looking at. So maybe PE is where you go. But and VCs maybe not where you go, right? And so the question that Steve has is, like, how do you shift the mindset of an investor, maybe it's PE or maybe it's VC, when they're thinking about time to value, time to return on capital being a 5-year window, not a 10 or 15-year window? What's your advice to Steve and other founders who are sitting with this problem of shifting mindsets of investors wherever they sit, like angel VC? Because remember, it is all about like, hey man, back us. We've got something really interesting to offer to the world, and it's not like an idea. It's something of actual value. So you're shifting mindsets at the end of the day. So how do you overcome that? Like if you're in the infrastructure play?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question, and we realized that ourselves, like before we came up with our unique business model and how we were able to raise the capital, we probably studied about 200 battery startups, and I would say 99% of them failed, and at least 50% of them, I would say they didn't fail because of the technology. I think it's the choice of capital they picked, early days. Because for an infrastructure business where you have to really build a tangible thing and then take it to market and qualify, it's a minimum 10-year journey. You rightly said it could be even 15 years, right, for new chemistries and new molecules. But if you go to a VC and their fund cycle is 5 years, 7 years, sometimes 3 years, depending upon when you're getting in and their cycle of their fund. And for them, not all the VCs, because you do have strategic VCs and some infrastructure VCs, but traditional software and SaaS based VCs, they would anticipate that you provide them exit within 3 to 5 years, and they get into a business, sometime even participate in decision making, and as a result, many businesses die because they raised too much too fast and gave away the control, and then someone who doesn't really understand the industry, for them it was either 0 or 1, right? They need to home runs and 8 fail. They don't care out of 10 investments, right? Whereas in infrastructure, if you look at the infrastructure businesses and their investment criteria, they are very picky, they're very selective, and they will be investing 10 100 to $1 billion and become part of that journey for 10 15 years. And we fortunately have been able to have access to such capital and such investors who really think long term, from pension funds to PEs to other strategic investors. Obviously not everything is software, right? And you do need this infrastructure to build. And solar, wind, people have seen how US really lost the control. Today we are importing all our solar panels from overseas. And this is the last thing we want, the heart of the new car and home storage, again importing from overseas. And impossible, right? For practically, if we need to build millions of these cars, it will be shiploads of batteries, impossible to import. So I think I would say identification of your investor is one of the most important thing. Early on, you really need to, you can't just keep participating like every software company into these pitch events and go in front of 20 VCs and pitch. I think infrastructure require a little bit different strategy and identification of those investors. Even if you present in front of one investor and it's the right investor, I feel like there is right type of capital available at each stage of the growth. Not just late stage. I think early stage companies like us, we were able to raise it just because we were very kind of diligent in terms of who we're going to, because end of the day, time is very important. You only got 8 hours, in a day to spend, and you spend that in front of 20 VCs, and most of them either said no or came up with their, very difficult terms, and then you end up taking it because you are craving for money, and that's what I would say has happened a lot with battery companies as well. And we fortunately we were able to get access to these investors, strategic particularly. We got the capital from a public company in Australia called Magnus Energy Technologies, and they became a very big supporter of us in early days. And so is some other private equity funds like Riverstone, that is a clean energy fund, $40 billion, became investor, and some others that we can't disclose publicly. But I think that selection and identification and selection is very, very important. It's mutual.
Well, I'd love to connect you to Steve anyway, just to maybe give him some advice, maybe more. You can share some more confidential stuff with him, because I do think like this problem's not going away, right? So anyway, we can partner. We touched on partnerships, even if it's just a conversation. Doesn't need to be a big thing to make a difference. So I'm curious to maybe double down on like that number that you shared. Like, did you say it was like 300 battery companies? How big was it?
In excess of 200, it could be almost 300, but in excess of 200 companies we evaluated back in 2016. I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And 99% failed. They disappeared. Like you review it, like it's available data. And
so why do you think that is? It's weird, right? Because if you think about like the idea of like all boats rise with a rising tide, and there's all this, there's the Clean Energy Act, there's all this money going into solar and into sustainability as a category. And then you've got Tesla, and it's not like it's a fringe technology, right? Like this is a category that's exploding. I wouldn't even say that it's growing. So it's interesting, like, how many battery companies have failed. Why would you say that is? Like, is it a unit economics thing where they, is it a supply chain thing? I know there's, there could be any number of reasons, but I'm curious to understand that, because I would imagine that if we could get more battery companies to succeed, such as what you guys are doing, the world would be a better place for it. So why is that? Why do you think battery companies have not got it right?
I would say, first of all, that study is a bit old, right? In 2016, back then, I wouldn't say battery was hot area, although it was expected to be, hot at some point, but the timing wasn't really that favorable back in 2015-16. So partly could be timing issue, partly the wrong business models, partly could be the tech itself, having a technology that doesn't really make, couldn't make to their commercial phase of the growth. And some of that, I think I mentioned, based on our assessment, was trying to access, this non-friendly capital that we call, you get capital investment from investors that don't really get the space, are not industry experts, and then you end up making a wrong move, and that lead to some form of derailing from your key strategy and the growth trail otherwise.
So, I'm so glad you said timing, because it's a really important point. So, have you heard of a entrepreneur called Bill Gross?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll bring up this article for everyone. But he basically did this TED talk. So I've got it up on screen. It's on Medium. But legendary, excuse me, legendary investor Bill Gross says, timing is the single biggest reason why startups succeed. And this is I've discussed this on the on the show a few times here, but it's like, is it execution? Is it funding? Is it the team? Is it the talent? Is it the plan, the business model? Maybe just, luck. And what he was saying is like, timing is so important. Like, I think we don't think about timing. We're so like, product, capital, team, execution, clearly defined market, blah, blah, blah. And obviously Bill's, probably more than most, built multiple unicorns. So he's saying, no, like timing is the number one reason. Like to your point, Shailesh, around these battery companies, maybe they were just too early, man. Like, maybe it's too early. Who knows? But what have you learned about timing, recognizing that markets are moving all the time?
No, I absolutely agree. Timing is very, very important. And I think when we say product or, the cost, the unit economics, they're all tied together, right? So if you're really solving a market problem, it means it's the right time. Otherwise, the problem probably doesn't exist, right? And you're over engineering or under engineering something. So timing definitely connects and makes it a little easier, right? But in many cases, like battery industry, right, it has taken us 10 years to develop a product. Product did exist in 2016, 17, but there is a process that you have to go through, and you can't really predict what will happen in 10 years. When we started the company in 2012, we had no idea that 2022 will be, this big market evolving around EVs, right? And every OEM right now, with the GM, Ford, Tesla, BMW, European, all the companies have at least 4 to 5 variants already on road now. And it takes a few years to develop and do all the trials and then launch these products. So some of that is impossible to predict, but at least I think if you are smart and you understand your industry, you can probably do a little bit justice by having some predictions that will favor you, how you design your product and overall product offering to the market. So, but I definitely agree that timing is very, very important, and putting all the pieces together at the right time is going to be the critical, I would say, element in your success story.
And just to add to that, I think intuition plays a big role. I think listening, like really listening to what the hell your target customers are saying, is important, and I think oftentimes entrepreneurs, we're so quick to want to commercialize a gap, but that idea, like there might be a gap in the market, right? But is there a market in the gap? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
There's so many gaps, but can you make money, dude? Like, is that gap growing as a category, or is it dying? Is it too early? Is it too late? And I think we need to have a more honest conversation with ourselves around, like, is this problem real, or is this just me drinking my own Kool-Aid?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we also tried to do back in 2013, 14, 15 timeframe. While we were designing these molecules, we went out and tried to partner, or at least learn and speak and listen to these end customers who eventually may not be our customer, but will be part of our customers, supply chain. And we realized that while the pain point did exist back then, and they were trying to solve it, but clearly if you try to connect the dots from one OEM to other OEM, we realized that there's definitely a need for domestic US based manufacturing, and long term it will not be possible, because majority of our peers were otherwise inventing something and going back to like either China, Korea, Japan, and license it and try to like make quick money, and that didn't work out. Many cases, they had to go through 4 or 5 year qualification process, and that would mean you have to sustain the business without revenues for 5 years. And how do you do it? So absolutely agree. I think listening to these, even if they are not your direct customer, or if they are part of that value chain, that sometimes also gives you thought process that you can eventually, with your intuition and some of the industry knowledge, and can connect the dot and plan a long term strategy.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of timing, I want to have a bit of fun with you. So I'm going to give you the keys, Shailesh, to the Matt Brown Show time machine. And I would love for you to go back to day one, right? So when you're like, damn, we're going to go solve this problem. And if you think about all the failings, all the learnings, all the successes along the way, and you could go back to yourself and give yourself advice about building a C4V, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think selection of the right type of investors. I would say, I think that is very, very important. How your business plan and business model really marries with the right type of money, because both are important. As I said, funding is very, very important, but marrying that to the right type of money is the crucial thing. I would suggest that if we had to, obviously we did very good job. I would say we didn't do too bad, but it took us longer to do it. If I had the same level of knowledge and I have to do it all again, I think we could do it much faster. The same outcome could be, probably we could easily save 3 to 4 years. But yeah, that's I think one advice definitely, that selection of right type of capital is very, very important.
Yep, great advice. I don't think $1 million is the same from one investor to the next.
Yeah.
Great. So let's talk about, you spoke about vision right up front in the show. So what is the hope? What is the outcome? What kind of a difference is C4V going to make to the world at the end of the day?
Yeah, so our goal is really, while big players looking into big markets, right? US, Europe. I think our goal is to really go into emerging markets, where markets that get ignored, and and there is a huge need for batteries. And we are hoping as a company, we would be able to build at least 10 gigafactories in emerging markets. By the way, I call US emerging market because there's no domestic gigafactory here, despite being big and very developed country. It is an emerging. And second, we are looking into Australia, we're looking into India. So countries that has huge consumer base, huge need, but still way behind in lithium-ion battery ecosystem, is what we want to go after, and build at least 10 of such factories by 2030, if not 20.
Mm-hmm. And bridge that 5,000 gigawatts gap, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Minimum 100 gigawatt hour is our target. It takes a lot of time to build stuff and all the way to mining. So if we can even achieve 100 gigawatt hour, that I would say is a good success for us.
Amazing. Let's wrap this up, Shailesh. Why do you do what you do? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I think my passion about clean energy, and my the level of I would say thinking I kind of put myself into, in terms of what can I do to make this place better for the next generation, right? And that's what that revolves around my whole day and my month and annual activities. What can we do so that our next generation can we can hand over the earth, Mother Earth, in a better shape, in a clean and greener than we got it from our previous generation.
Amazing. Well, I got two young kids, dude, so I hope you do that.
Yeah, I got two as well. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, great. Well, look, thank you so much for being on the show, Shailesh. You guys are doing amazing things, especially in the energy infrastructure space. I think it's incredible and it's hard. And I think the hard things are what's valuable because, by the way, if it was easy, then everyone would be doing it. So, congratulations to you on your success so far.
Yeah, thanks, man. And it was again pleasure be part of your show. Thanks for doing this. I think having our individual entrepreneurs' voice reach to the mass is very, very important. So you're doing a great job there. So thanks for hosting us again.
Anytime. Thanks, Shailesh. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you all again soon. Ciao.